Section 6 of the Three Lieutenants. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Three Lieutenants by William Henry Giles Kingston. Chapter 5. Granada. Fall in with the tutor. Murray's first meeting with Stella. Master Spider introduced to Mr. Scrofton. Arrival at Antigua. Scenery and adventures on shore. Alec Murray in love. A boat excursion. A capsize. A long swim. Anxiety on board. A search. The missing ones found. Early the next morning the frigate made that lovely gem of the ocean, Granada, and just as the fortifications crowning Richmond Heights came in view, and the slopes of the surrounding hills, covered with orange groves and palm trees, plantations, and fields, amid which sparkling streams rushed downward to the sea, a ship was seen standing out of the harbour. She was at once known by her number to be the Tudor. The frigate was immediately hove to, and the corvette, having approached, imitated her example. A boat was forthwith lowered from the latter, and Alec Murray, accompanied by Archy Gordon, came on board the Plantagenet. Alec, having delivered the despatches of which he was the bearer to the captain, was warmly greeted by his old friends, whom he accompanied into the gun-room, while Archy was hurried down into the midshipman's berth. Both parties were eager to hear each other's adventures. The corvette had been detained longer than was expected at Madeira, and had been 3 days in the magnificent harbour of Granada. "Oh, it's a braw place, there's ne'er doot about that," said Archy. "They say it's just like Italy, and if so, Italy must be a beautiful country. Hills and dales, covered with plantations, sic fruits and flowers, and a plenty of Scotsmen. It has only one fault, there are no ladies, unless they call the black lassies, who gang wi' blue silk parasols, and na shoes to their feet, so." Archy's description of the island made all hands eager to visit it, and much disappointment was felt when the sails were filled, and in company with the Tudor a course was steered for St. Vincent. Stella had been on deck watching the approaching corvette, and she could not help remarking the young and handsome lieutenant who came from her on board the frigate. Alick was not introduced, but he stood for some time talking to Captain Hemming not far off, and occasionally his eyes glanced towards her lovely countenance, while he wondered who she could be. It was one of the first questions he put when he reached the gun-room. Every one had plenty to say about her and her father. He did not express his own opinion. Had he admired her less he might have done so. Alec Murray returned on board the corvette with the image of Stella impressed on his heart. Like a wise man he tried to banish it, but go it would not. Again and again that sweet countenance rose up before him, and he longed for an opportunity of meeting her again, of hearing her voice, of ascertaining her opinions, of learning her history. The ships visited St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica, and other islands in succession, the one vying with the other in beauty, though the palm was given to the few first seen. As to the blacks, they all appeared sufficiently quiet, so that only 2 or 3 days were spent at each island. The midshipmen had not forgotten their object in purchasing Spider, and every day they had him into their berth to give him instructions in polite knowledge, as they took care to tell Mr Scrofton. With all the pains they took, however, he made no perceptible progress, though he had no objection to eat the nuts and fruits offered him, provided they were ripe and sweet, or to sit with a stick in his paws and shoulder it at the word of command. Still he infinitely preferred frolicking about on deck, or swinging by his tail to a horizontal spar slung for his accommodation. He appeared altogether perfectly reconciled to his lot, except when the ship was in harbour, when he would go aloft and sit on the main truck, gazing towards the green trees, while he chattered away, evidently, as Gerald said, meditating on the pleasures of his youth spent amid his native forests. At last one day the midshipmen conducted Spider in due form, dressed in a coat and trousers, with a tarpaulin hat they had manufactured for him, to the boatswain's cabin. "We have done our best, Mr Scrofton, to bring up this monkey in the way he should go, in order to become a civilised being," said Tom, with perfect gravity. "Notwithstanding all our pains, he doesn't know A from Z, and though we have tried to make him understand how to light the lamp, he can no more use the matches than at first, and puts them in his mouth, or throws them away if given to him, and when it has been lighted he pokes his paws into the flame to see what the curious red thing is just sprung out of the wick." "I don't expect that you ever will teach him, young gentlemen," answered the boatswain seriously. "It would take centuries to produce the change. After many generations of domestic life that long tail of his, having become useless, would disappear, and his hinder paws would take the form of human feet. His forehead would expand, his arms would become shorter, his body stouter, till at length all outward trace of his monkey origin would be lost. That's what my books say, and I believe them." "Very good. I won't dispute the point," said Tom, "but I want to know, Poxy, the first monkeys who turned into men got their education by which the change was produced. As long as they had got their tails, they never would have thought of leaving their native forests, so well suited to them." "I haven't quite arrived at that part of the subject," answered the boatswain, "but I'll consult my books and tell you." "Suppose we teach him seamanship, how long do you think it will be before he's fit to be boatswain of a 10-gun brig, Mr Scrofton?" asked Gerald, in the most innocent tone he could assume. Just then some one gave Master Spider a sly pinch on the tail, which made him grin and chatter, and of course set all the midshipmen laughing. Mr Scrofton, not perceiving the cause, thought that they were laughing at him, and casting an angry glance from his ferrety eyes at Gerald, he answered, "I'll tell you what, young gentlemen, it would be, in my opinion, about the same time that it would take to fit you for the post, unless you mend your manners. The boatswain even of a 10-gun brig must be a man of character, and no jackanapes can ever become one, and the boatswain of a frigate, you'll understand, is not to be sneered at with impunity." "That's the very point at issue," exclaimed Tom, clapping his hands, and in no ways daunted by the boatswain's anger. "You acknowledge, then, that a monkey never can become a boatswain, and that Lord Monboddo is altogether in the wrong." "I don't acknowledge anything of the sort, because I know nothing about the matter," answered the boatswain, not intending to say what he did. "But let me inform you, if you bring that monkey of yours here again to mock me, I shall be compelled to take measures for putting a stop to such audacious proceedings." The midshipmen, fearing from the vengeful look Mr Scrofton cast at poor Spider that their pet's life was in danger, endeavoured to calm his anger by assuring him that they had no intention of being disrespectful, and that they begged he would retain his own opinion, notwithstanding anything they had said on the subject. They had a hearty laugh when they got back to the berth, fully resolved to bait the boatswain again on the first opportunity. At length the two ships lay snugly moored off the Royal Dockyard, English Harbour, in the island of Antigua, the prettiest of all pretty harbours. Their arrival caused no small commotion among the inhabitants, especially of the softer sex, when it was known that they were to remain some time, and that a ball was to be given to the officers at Government House. Colonel O'Regan and his daughter went on shore to stay with their friends, Mr and Mrs Houghton, who had a pretty cottage residence in the neighbourhood. A deputation came soon afterwards to invite them to the ball. At first Stella was disposed to decline the honour, as it involved a drive of 11 miles across the island to St. John's, the capital. But Lieutenant Murray, who happened to be calling at the house, adding his solicitations, she accepted the invitation. The colonel was much disconcerted by the delay. He had expected to be at Jamaica some time before, where, as he told Captain Hemming, he intended to leave his daughter with some friends while he made an excursion to the Spanish Main. The object he had in view he did not explain. As there was no help for it, he was obliged to submit, and the captain assured him that after leaving Antigua his intention was to proceed direct to Jamaica. Antigua, although not so lovely as other islands to the south, possesses a beauty of its own, and several trips to enjoy its scenery were made by the officers into the interior. On 2 occasions Alick and Jack accompanied Stella and her father. While Jack took charge of the colonel, Alick rode by Stella's side. Each time he met her the more he was attracted, and yet he could not say that she gave him any encouragement. She was interested in his conversation, for he was better informed and talked better than his brother officers, but had she discovered his devoted admiration? They reached a spot near the coast, almost on the summit of one of the lofty cliffs which form ramparts in most parts around the island, and from whence the ground slopes inwards in gradual declivities towards the green and grassy centre. The whole island, which is of a rough circular form, lay in sight. A line of fortifications crowned an opposite height overlooking the sea on one side, and a wide extent of country, consisting of undulating downs and verdant fields in which countless cattle were feeding, with the numerous houses of the planters embosomed in trees on the other. In the northwest the town of St. John's was clearly seen, while here and there some of the many deep creeks and bays which indent the coastline could be distinguished, running far inland, several swelling into estuaries, and others forming commodious harbours. Isles and islets of all shapes and sizes lay scattered off the shore, and far away towards the west the islands of Guadeloupe, Montserrat, Nevis, and St. Kitts rose out of the blue ocean. "What a perfect Arcadian scene!" said Alick, as he and his companion gazed over the smiling landscape. "And the Arcadians are kept in proper order by yonder frowning batteries," remarked Stella, pointing to the line of fortifications. "Until free and enlightened governments are established throughout the globe, we cannot hope to find a true Arcadia. How many a lovely region, such as that now spread out before us, has suddenly become the scene of rapine and bloodshed!" "But those batteries are intended to defend, not to overawe the inhabitants, and wherever the glorious flag of England waves, there at all events we may hope to find true liberty and peace," answered Alick. "I would, then, that the flag of England were waving now over the whole world," said Stella, with an involuntary sigh. "I long for peace and rest, but since those who have their power are supine or indifferent to the sufferings of their fellow creatures, it must be left to individuals to attempt the task of redressing the wronged and restoring freedom to the oppressed." Alick was puzzled what to answer. He guessed that Stella was alluding to her father's schemes for regenerating the world. As far as he understood them from the few remarks the colonel had let drop, they were, he considered, utterly hopeless, but he could not tell Stella so. One thing, however, he discovered, that though her enthusiasm and love for her father had made her warmly enter into his views, she was a true woman at heart, and as really feminine as he could desire. Alick changed the subject, and soon interested her with a description of his Highland home and the western islands of Scotland. He fancied, as they rode back, that her manner had become softer when she addressed him than at first, and that she listened more willingly to him than to any of the other officers. At all events, he enjoyed a happiness in her company he had never before known, though he could not at times forget that in a few days they must be parted, and that the chances of meeting again were very small. English Harbour is not so much liked by midshipmen as by gunroom officers and captains, the former having shorter leave and smaller purses, not being able to get away so often to amuse themselves in the capital on the other side of the island as their superiors. Mr Houghton, a friend of Colonel O'Regan, had come on board to take luncheon with the midshipmen, as had Alick Gordon. "I vote we take a cruise this afternoon," exclaimed Tom. "Mr Houghton, you were saying that you wish to go down to Falmouth Harbour, and Mr Cherry will, I dare say, lend us the pinnace. It is only about 2 miles to leeward, and we can beat back again in time to land you for your dinner hour." Mr Houghton accepted the invitation. Tom forthwith went to the first lieutenant, with whom he was a favourite, to ask for the boat. "You may have her, youngster," was the answer, "but keep a look out for squalls. They are apt to come off the shore without warning, and you may be capsized in a moment if you are not on your guard." "Thank you, sir, we will take great care," answered Tom, returning to the berth to report the success of his mission. Mr Jennings, the lieutenant of marines, hearing that they were going, begged to accompany them. Desmond, Archy, and Norris, McTavish, the assistant surgeon, and the captain's clerk, made up the party, with 2 men to look after the boat while they were on shore. The wind was light, the sea smooth, and with all sails set before the breeze, they ran down the coast. In a short time they arrived at their destination, and as the weather was hot, and they had not much time to spare, they amused themselves on the beach, while Mr Houghton went up to pay his visit. He was not long absent, and on his return they at once shoved off and stood to the southward, hoping to find more wind at a distance from the shore. They were a merry party, and as usual stories were told and songs sung. They had made several tacks, but as yet had got not more than half way back to the ship. "We will go about again," said Norris, who was at the helm. "At all events, inshore we shall feel less of the current, which drifts us to leeward almost as fast as we beat to windward." The boat was put about, and once more headed in towards the land, which was about 2 miles distant. "Now, McTavish, give us one of your Scotch songs," exclaimed Lieutenant Jennings, "the Laird of Cockpen, or something of that sort." McTavish, who, though he had not much of a voice, contrived to make his songs popular by the humour he threw into his tone, had sung about a stave or so, and Norris and the rest of the party, with laughing countenances while listening to his song, forgot Mr Cherry's caution. The boat had been gliding smoothly on, when suddenly over she heeled. Norris, putting down the helm, shouted out, "Let go the halyards!" but before a hand could reach the cleats her gunwale was under water. "We are going over!" cried Norris. "Up to windward, all of you!" Saying this, he sprang to the weather side, and the rest followed his example, though they could not right her. Yet she went over so slowly that they all had time to scramble up on her side before her canvas touched the water. The sails being flattened aft assisted to support her, and prevent her from going right over. For the first moment all believed that she would sink and leave them alone on the surface. Fortunately, however, her ballast consisted of breakers of water, which, not being secured, floated out. "Come, at all events we have something to hold on to," said Tom, "and now we must try and right the boat. Who has got a knife?" Every person felt in his pockets, but no knife could be found. The seamen, strange to say, had come away without theirs. They and the midshipmen attempted to cast off the sheets, but the side of the boat to which they were made fast, being under water, could not be reached. For some time no one spoke. At the distance they were from the ship they could not hope to have been seen. "Is there no chance of our drifting on shore?" asked Norris at length. "I am afraid not," answered Mr Houghton. "The current sets away from the land, and we shall be carried farther and farther from it. They looked anxiously around for a sail, on the chance that she might pass near them. Not one was to be seen standing towards the land. Again a desperate attempt was made to right the boat. "If we had but a knife we could do it," cried Tom. "I will never again step into a boat without one." "We shall be fortunate if we have the opportunity," observed McTavish. "There is but little chance of our being picked up, and as to any of us reaching the shore, that seems impossible." No answer was made to his remark. The squall which had capsized the boat was succeeded by others. The weather was evidently changing for the worse, and the boat drifting farther and farther from the land. Their prospects were dreary in the extreme, indeed almost hopeless. The gunwale of the boat on which they were seated was only 6 inches out of the water, so that should a sea get up they might all quickly be washed away. Norris felt very unhappy as he had been at the helm. "I hope that you fellows will forgive me," he said. "I little expected the boat to capsize so suddenly, though I ought to have kept a better lookout." "Don't talk about it," answered Tom. "It was as much our fault as yours. We have each of us much to ask forgiveness for if we were to count up old scores." "Mr Jennings, I hope you will forgive me for capsizing you in the gale when we were coming out from England." "Of course, youngster," he answered gravely. "I have not thought about it since." "Thank you, sir," said Tom, as if his mind had been relieved of a burden. "I hope old Scrofton won't be thinking about the tricks we have played him." "I was just after thinking that I wish he may not ill treat Spider," cried Desmond. "I don't know what the poor baste will do without us." "What we have to do is to forgive all others from the bottom of our hearts," remarked Archy. "We need not trouble ourselves what they will think or say of us." Archy, who was a true Christian, made several other fitting remarks, clearly pointing out to his companions the only way by which they could be prepared for the new existence into which there seemed every probability they would soon have to enter. "It's a grievous thought, my friends, that we do not all so live that we may be fit at any moment to die," he observed calmly. Few of those present failed to agree with him, and for the time, at all events, to wish that they were as well prepared as he appeared to be. Again they were all silent for some minutes. "Something must be done," exclaimed Tom, who had been thinking over the matter, and in his own mind had resolved what to do. "It's too far for any of us to swim to shore," observed Mr Jennings. "I would try it, but I never could keep afloat 5 minutes together." "I, too, am a miserable swimmer," sighed Mr Houghton. "Besides which, the sharks would take good care not to allow one of us to reach the shore," he added in a whisper. Neither of the seamen could swim, and McTavish, the only other grown man of the party, had had very little practice either. "Well, then," exclaimed Tom, "I will try it. My brother Jack swam on shore when the Racer was wrecked in the Mediterranean, and was the means of saving the lives of many of the people. I am not a much worse swimmer than he was then. I feel sure that I could do it if I had a companion. It's a long way to go alone through the silent water." "Faith, I would go with you," cried Desmond, "but I am afraid that I should keep you back rather than help you forward." Archy Gordon, who had sat silent during the discussion, suddenly exclaimed, "I am not so good a swimmer as you are, Tom, but I see no other way of saving our lives, and if I go down I shall at all events be doing my duty." "Thank you, Archy," said Tom. "I accept your offer, and will do my best to help you along." Had any other means offered, the rest of the party would not have allowed the young midshipmen to run so fearful a hazard of their lives. Mr Houghton especially knew well the danger they would encounter from the sharks, but he said nothing to damp their courage. Archy at once began to get ready. Taking off his shoes and jacket, he gave them to McTavish, and begged him to preserve them for him. Tom followed his example, though not indeed with the same careful spirit as his friend. He threw his jacket and shoes into the water. They both kept on their socks, which were providentially coloured, as well as the rest of their clothes. "Good bye, old fellows," said Tom. "We must lose no more time," and he and Archy shook hands with all around. "Now, Archy, we will start and strike out bravely." Tom, suiting the action to the word, slipped into the water. Archy did the same. On they went, keeping alongside each other. Archy found that he could swim better than he had expected, and he and Tom cheered up each other. "I wish Gerald had been with us," said Tom. "Our chances of escape are better than those on the wreck." Now and then they turned on their backs, resting for a little, striking out, however, with their arms and legs, so that they still made headway. Tom, under his brother's instructions, had become a first-rate swimmer, and for his age was wonderfully muscular, so that he was able to go on steadily without feeling exhausted. Archy, though taller and bigger from having had less practice, more quickly began to feel fatigued. The shore seemed a long way off. Still they had already, they saw, not a considerable distance from the boat, for they could scarcely distinguish her as she floated just above the surface. Tom thought that they must be a mile from the shore. Again they threw themselves on their backs, pushing on with their feet and keeping their arms moving round and round. When Tom looked back he could no longer see the boat. He did not, however, tell Archy of this. He could not help fearing that she had sunk. "Are you rested, Archy?" he asked. "Yes," was the answer, though not in quite so confident a tone as Tom would have liked. "Well, then, on we go again," said Tom, and they swam steadily forward as before. Scarcely a minute after this, as Tom cast his eye on one side, what was his horror to observe the fin and back of a huge shark, scarcely more than a fathom from him. The monster shot by. "I only hope it is steering a different course to ours," thought Tom. Just then he caught sight of the wicked eye of another at the same distance, following in the wake of the first. He did not tell Archy what he had seen for fear of unnerving him, while he kept striking out with might and main, letting his feet rise higher than he would otherwise have done for the sake of creating a splash, and shouting as he swam on, "Strike away, Archy! Bravo! We are getting on famously." Archy in the meantime was doing his best, though his legs and arms began to ache. Still he resolved, as long as his strength would hold out, to persevere. At length he felt that he could do no more. "Go on, Tom," said he, faintly. "Make the best of your way on shore, and get help for the poor fellows. I will follow as fast as I can." "No, no," answered Tom, "I am not going to desert you. Come, rest your head on my chest. It will help you wonderfully. Just consider me a piece of cork. You know I float like one. Only keep your legs kicking, and your arms moving smartly." Tom did not tell Archy why he gave this advice, but he knew very well that if they were to remain quiet for an instant the cowardly sharks would make a dart at them, and that only by splashing vigorously could they keep off the monsters. He himself did so with his legs and one hand, while he placed the other under his friend's back. Archy felt his strength much restored after this rest, and declared himself ready to go on again. On they went once more. Though they were certain that they had made good way, still the shore appeared fearfully far off, as they gazed at it with eyes growing somewhat dim from fatigue. Archy exerted himself more than he would before have considered possible, but once more a faintness came over him. "Oh, Tom, I am sinking. Don't wait for me. You will soon reach the shore now," he cried out. Tom, however, approaching with a couple of strokes, seized him and once more placed his head on his chest, striking furiously with his own feet, for the instant before he had seen another shark, and the monster seemed eyeing him as if about to make a grab at his arms and legs. "Keep your feet kicking out, as I told you before," he exclaimed. "You will not sink, and it will keep them from getting the cramp. Kick, Archy, kick." Archy could with difficulty do so. Still he felt a great relief to his arms, and suddenly his strength again seemed to return. "I will go on now," he said, turning once more round, and he and Tom swam on together as before, with their eyes fixed on the shore. Each time that Archy felt faint he was aroused by Tom's encouraging cries, and nerved himself to fresh exertions. How anxiously they strained their eyes ahead! The shore grew more and more distinct, and yet it seemed a long way off. At length they could distinguish the sandy beach and the green herbage beyond. Again Archy's strength began to fail him. Near as was the shore, he felt that he might not, after all, be able to reach it. His sensations were those of a person in a dreadful dream. Even Tom began to feel his strength almost exhausted. Archy once more cried out that he was sinking. That moment Tom felt his feet touch something. A horror for an instant seized him. It might be the back of a shark. Still on he struck, towing Archy. Again his feet touched something below him. It did not yield. He tried again. Yes, he was sure. It was firm ground. "Hurrah, Archy! We are on shore at last," he cried out. "Let your feet fall, and you will find I am right." "Thank God!" answered Archy, as his feet also touched the sand. Happily the sea was smooth, and there was no outdrift. Even then Archy felt that he could scarcely reach the beach. Tom gave him his hand, exclaiming, "Come on, we have not far to go now, at all events." They waded on. Gradually the water shoaled as they made their way up the shelving sand. Tom felt his strength returning, but Archy could with difficulty make headway. Now the water reached only to their middles. Now it was scarcely knee deep, and they were able to get on faster. Tom breathed more freely, for he expected to see Archy drop every instant. Scarcely, indeed, had they reached the dry sand than down he sank. Tom threw himself by his side. "Cheer up, Archy, we are safe," he exclaimed. "Don't give way now." "I shall be better soon," said Archy. "But oh, Tom, let us return thanks to Him who has preserved us. Don't let us fancy it was our own strength. I never otherwise could have done it, I know. I am thankful, indeed I am, but we must not forget our companions. Go and try to get a boat and put off to them. I will follow you as soon as I am able to." It was already dusk, and the gloom was increased by thick clouds gathering in the sky, betokening a blowing night. Tom saw indeed that no time was to be lost, and finding that Archy could not yet move, he unwillingly left him, and hurried off to obtain assistance. We must now return on board the Plantagenet. When Mr Cherry found that the boat did not make her appearance, as it was long past the time the midshipmen promised to be back, he felt somewhat annoyed, and made up his mind that the next time they asked for the boat they should not have her. He was walking the deck when the quartermaster announced that a boat had come off from the shore with a black in her, who had something to say about a pinnace, but what it was he could not exactly make out. "Let him come on deck at once," said Mr Cherry, hurrying to the gangway. "What is it you have to say, my man?" he asked. The negro doffed his hat, twisting and wriggling about, apparently either from nervousness at finding himself on board a man of war, or from his anxiety to deliver his message properly. Mr Cherry, however, managed to make out that a boat had been capsized, that two midshipmen had swum on shore, and that they had gone off again in two boats to search for the wreck. Just then Jack and Terence, who had been on shore, returned, and on cross questioning the black, they felt satisfied that Tom and Archy Gordon were the two midshipmen who had reached the shore, and that those remaining on the wreck were in extreme peril. The report of what had happened quickly spread through the ship, and every one felt anxious about their shipmates. 4 boats were immediately manned, Jack and Terence each taking command of one, Higson going in a third, and Mr Scrofton having charge of the fourth. The first Reddy having called alongside the Tudor to give the information, 2 of her boats were immediately despatched to aid in the search. The weather in the meantime, as night advanced, grew worse and worse. Down came a deluge of rain, while vivid lightning darted from the sky. The wind, too, had been rising, and as they got outside the harbour they found a considerable sea running. Each officer was to take the direction he judged best. Before shoving off, the boatswain got the black, who brought the information, into his boat, and pumping him, learnt exactly whereabouts the pinnace had capsized, while he also ascertained the direction in which the current ran. It might seem an easy thing to fall in with a boat which had capsized scarcely a mile off, but some hours had elapsed since the accident had occurred, and during all that time she must have drifted for a considerable distance. The direction in which she had gone also could be calculated only by those who knew exactly the set and rate of the current. Jack and Terence went away fully believing that they should before long fall in with the wreck. Their only fear was that those left on it might have been washed off, or, succumbing to fatigue, have dropped into the water. The thunder rattled and the lightning flashed overhead. Between the intervals they often fancied they could hear the voices of their shipmates hailing them. Sometimes, too, through the gloom they imagined that they could see the boat on her side, with a few still clinging to her, but when they got up to the spot she was not there. Though Terence hoped to find all the party, he naturally felt most anxious on account of Gerald Desmond. "I ought to have thought of the risks he would have had to run," he said to himself. "To be sure, I got into a good many scrapes and tumbled out of them, and I hope he may. I cannot bear the thoughts of having to write to my poor sister, and to tell her that her boy is lost." Still the boats continued searching in every direction, the wind blowing fresh and the foaming seas hissing round them. There was little hope, indeed, that they should find those they were looking for, though the boat herself might by chance be fallen in with some time or other. Mr Scrofton, meantime, who, though a bad philosopher, was a thorough seaman, had run down at about the distance from the shore he understood the pinnace had been when capsized. He had, however, passed the spot, according to his calculations, some way, no sign of the wreck having been seen, when a hail was heard. "There they are, hurrah!" cried some of the men. "No, no, that came from a boat. I see her." "What boat is that?" asked Mr Scrofton. "A shore boat, and I am Tom Rogers," was the answer. The boats were soon alongside each other. Tom said that as soon as he could procure a boat he had shoved off, and that Archy Gordon had done the same. He was at no great distance in another boat. "You don't expect to find her hereabouts," said Mr Scrofton. "She will have been carried, according to my calculation, 4 or it may be 5 miles more to the southward by this time, and it will take us the best part of an hour before we are up to her. My plan is to run down that distance, or more than that, and then to beat back. It's better to go rather beyond her than a little short, and if she is still floating we shall fall in with her." Tom saw the wisdom of this plan, and the two boats stood on in company, a bright lookout being kept on either side. They had run on for some time when Tom thought that they must have gone far enough, but the boatswain persevered. Tom's boat being manned by blacks, he had nothing to do but look out. Fully half an hour had passed when he thought he saw an object ahead. He hailed Mr Scrofton's boat. "All right," was the answer. "I see her." "Let go the halyards," cried the boatswain, and the sails were lowered, but as they approached, great was Tom's sorrow to see only 5 people clinging to the boat. Mr Houghton and Lieutenant Jennings were among them, but he could not distinguish Gerald Desmond. "Poor fellow, he must have gone," he murmured. "Where are the rest?" asked Mr Scrofton as the boat ran alongside, and eager hands were stretched out to lift the sufferers on board, for they could with difficulty help themselves. "We are glad to see you, though." "They had not left us 5 minutes before we saw you," answered Mr Jennings. "They cannot as yet be many hundred yards off." Tom immediately pulled away towards the shore, in the direction the swimmers must have taken. He knew that though the time was short, they might have all sunk, or that the ravenous sharks might have got hold of them. Nothing but despair, indeed, would have induced them to make the attempt. Great was his relief on seeing at length four heads above the surface, with their faces directed landward. So intent were they, indeed, that they were not aware of his approach. Each one had lashed himself to an oar, with the faint hope, though they had but little notion of swimming, of gaining the shore. Tom's shout was the first intimation they had of his escape, for they all had given him and Archy up as lost. Desmond was the first helped on board, and great was their delight at meeting. Highly satisfied with the success of his expedition, Mr Scrofton received all the party on board, promising the blacks in the shore boat a further reward if they would tow the pinnace towards the shore. He then, with the rescued party, made the best of his way back to the ship, happily soon afterwards falling in with Archy Gordon, whose boat, while he was taken on board, was sent to assist the other shore boat. Captain Hemming, who felt very anxious on their account, was too glad to get them back to find fault. Tom and Archy received the praise which was their due for their gallant act, while Mr Scrofton was properly complimented by the captain for his sagacity and judgment, and the midshipmen resolved never more to attempt to quiz him about his philosophical notions. Jack and Terence did not get back till daylight, when they found that Tom and Gerald had been snug in their hammocks for several hours. They felt somewhat inclined to quarrel with them for the trouble they had given, though in reality heartily thankful that they had escaped. End of Section 6. Section 7 of The Three Lieutenants by William Henry Giles Kingston. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. The cruise of the Drogher, Barbuda Field Sports, hospitably entertained, sail again, Captain Quasho, a drunken crew, reach Saba, the island explored, the black crew take French leave, Higson and others go in search of them, the three midshipmen and Needham driven off the land by a hurricane, the drogher disappears in the darkness of night. Although all the gunroom officers who could get leave were anxious to go to the ball, old Higson, who was not a dancing man, and some of the youngsters from both ships declared that it would be a great bore. Notwithstanding the fearful danger so many of them had lately escaped, they took it into their heads that it would be far pleasanter to make a trip somewhere by sea. After due discussion, they hired a drogher, a country vessel employed in running between the surrounding islands and islets. She was sloop rigged, of about 30 tons, with a small cabin aft, a capacious hold, and a forecastle for the black crew, honest fellows, but not pleasant neighbours in a close atmosphere. Higson went in command. Tom and Gerald and Norris, with Archy Gordon and another midshipman and a master's assistant from the corvette, with Dick Needham, formed the party, including, of course, Master Spider, who was taken to make fun. The mids also had their doubts as to the treatment he might receive from Mr Scrofton during their absence. It was settled that they should first steer for Barbuda, where snipes were to be shot, fish caught, and deer hunted, and that then, wind and weather permitting, they should visit other islands in the neighbourhood. Provisions enough to last them twice the time they were likely to be away were shipped, and liquors in proportion. They fully expected to enjoy themselves amazingly. After beating out of the harbour and rounding the east end of the island under the pilotage of the regular skipper, Captain Quasho, they had a fair wind for Barbuda, where they arrived early in the day and cast anchor in a small harbour. They were cordially received by the overseer, who happened to be close at hand, and who, with one assistant, constituted the white population of the island. He gave them leave to kill as many birds as they could hit, promised them horses to ride in chase of deer, and, what was more to the purpose, invited them to dinner at his residence, the castle, an ancient fortalice on the shores of a lagoon some distance off. They agreed to shoot till the arrival of the steeds, which the overseer rode back to order. After a considerable expenditure of powder to little purpose, for Tom, the best shot among them, had only killed one snipe, a troop of horses, led by several black cavaliers, dressed in leathern caps and high boots, with belts round their waists, and duck guns slung over their shoulders, and followed by a pack of hounds, made their appearance. Their leader announced that they were the huntsmen, and invited the officers to mount the steeds they had brought. Tom inspected the horses with no favourable eye. They were sorry animals, but the rest of the party were not particular, and all were soon mounted. As to going, that was another thing. 4 miles an hour was the utmost their riders were likely to get out of them. The midshipmen kicked their heels with might and main, and whacked the poor beasts' backs till their arms ached, but not a foot faster would they move. "I say, Sambo, how shall we ever run down the deer with these brutes?" asked Higson, perspiring at every pore from his exertions. The black huntsman grinned at the notion of overtaking the deer. "No, no, massa, we get round dem and shoot with guns. Sure way to kill dem." "At all events, let's go and see the style of sport," said Higson, and the party set forward. The island is mostly flat, and so covered with high bushes that they could see neither to the right hand nor to the left. They reached a forest of considerable extent, when, after some time, the dogs started a deer, which Sambo's huge duck gun, loaded with slugs, brought to the ground. Scarcely was the venison bagged, than down came such torrents of rain that the party were speedily wet to the skin, and were glad to make the best of their way towards the castle, keeping close together not to lose each other. The wardrobe of their host furnished them with dry clothing, the elders with shirts and trousers, the younger having to dispense with the latter garments, and in somewhat masquerading guise her Majesty's officers sat down to a sumptuous repast of turtle and venison, several varieties of fish, and land crabs of exquisite flavour. Bottled beer and wine in abundance made them all very jolly, but there was a drawback. Flights of mosquitoes came buzzing and biting them, unmercifully revelling in the youngsters' fresh blood, till some oakum set on fire, with fresh leaves thrown on it, put the miscreant insects to the rout. Cigars and pipes were produced, and the midshipmen thought not of troubles, past or future. Sofas and chairs served them for couches. Old Higson sat up lustily puffing away at his pipe, and thereby escaped the countless punctures and furious itching, of which every one else complained when they got up in the morning. After breakfast their host sent them across the lagoon in 2 clumsy fishing boats to see a seine drawn. The opposite shore gained, the black fishermen having landed their passengers, plunging into the water, carried out their net in a semicircle, and soon began dragging the ends towards the strand. The mids, of course, lent a hand, hauling at one end, while some of the negroes took the other, and the rest tumbled about outside, laughing and shouting and beating the water to frighten their prisoners. In spite of them, some 50 or more of the biggest fish, dreading the cauldron or frying pan, making a bold dash for liberty, fairly leaped over the net, most of them, as they rose 3 or 4 feet out of the water, clearing the heads of the negroes, while several sprang right into their faces, capsizing one stout fellow, and making 2 or 3 others howl and caper in a way which set the midshipmen roaring with laughter. They had, notwithstanding this, a capital haul, consisting of barracutas, snappers, gold and silver fish, Spanish mackerel, kingfish, and others. Tom and Gerald, in their eagerness, rushed into the water to catch hold of some of their prey, when a monster gave a grab at Paddy's fingers, which made him spring back with alarm. The blacks directly after hauled out a shark, big enough to have bitten off his arm, if not to have swallowed him. The same afternoon the adventurers got back to their drogher, the overseer having liberally supplied them with as much venison and fish as they could possibly consume. The chart was got out, and a consultation held as to the place they should next visit. Captain Quasho was called in. "Take my advice, gent'men. Wind fair for Saba. Cura's place dem call at St. Kitts. Fine oranges dere. See Mount Misery, big crag up to de sky, 10,000 feet high." Quasho was a little over the mark. "And so on to Nevis, lubly isle, and we get back to English harbour in good time. Yes, I forgot dere one more isle we go see. Me got broder dere. Only one buckra, massa, and him family berry glad see officer. Plenty fun. Oh yes. Den we stop a day or two and catch fish. Plenty fine fish in dese seas, massa. Great big barracuda and glooper. Him 50-pound weight, and maggot and hedgehog and jewfish. Him wonderful good to eat. Fit for de Queen of England." And Quasho smacked his lips. "Den dere is de snapper and flat fork and squirrel and parrotfish, and wid just all de colours like de bird, and de albacore almost as big as de glooper. And let me see de doctor, him got lance in de tail, and so him called doctor. Ho, ho. And den dere is de kingfish and de watee, de kind, de commerie, de convably, de old wife, de cobbler, de 10-pounder, de guard, de bolawi, rayard, de shoe, and me don't sabby how many more." Quasho here ceased enumerating for want of breath, declaring that he had not mentioned half the delicious and curious fish the buckra officers were sure to catch if they tried, and that he would undertake to procure hooks and lines should they wish it. Quasho was not disinterested in giving this advice. The drogher was hired by the day, and the longer she was out the more he pocketed. The midshipmen did not reflect on this, and thought his advice good. Old Higson also was in no hurry to get back to the ship to attend to the unpleasant duties of the mate of the lower deck. He was captain for the nonce, and command is sweet, even over a black crew and a set of boisterous youngsters. The anchor was got up, and sail made accordingly for Saba. A moonlight night on the Caribbean Sea in fine weather is very enjoyable, provided a person does not go to sleep with his eyes gazing at the pale luminary, for if he escapes being moon stricken he will certainly get a stiff neck or suffer in some other way. The youngsters enjoyed themselves to their hearts' content, and when tired of skylarking with Spider, piped to supper, after which those not on watch turned in. What were the rats, cockroaches, and centipedes swarming in the little confined cabin, redolent of tobacco smoke and spirits, to them? Not 1,000th part as bad as the detestable mosquitoes on the shores of the Barbuda lagoon, they agreed. So some occupied the bunks, regular ovens, others the lockers, and Tom took possession of the cabin table, the least stifling spot, but tenable only, and that by no human being but a midshipman, in moderate weather. Old Higson took the first watch. Timmins, the master's assistant, was far too eloquent just then to be trusted, and Norris was to have the middle watch. He, at all events, was steady. Quasho, however, had taken more Montserrat rum on board than was good for his intellects, such as they were, and Higson suspected that he was as likely to steer north as west, or to box the compass if left in charge. Needham was perfectly sober. He was never otherwise when at sea, for he had a strong head and took but little liquor. It might be too much to answer for him when the ship was paid off. He preferred sleeping on deck to occupying a locker in the cabin, and of course it would not have done to have sent him to sleep forward with the blacks. He did once put his nose through the fore hatchway, and as quickly withdrew it, coughing and spitting to get rid of the disagreeable odour which ascended from below. "To my mind, Mr Higson, them niggers are all as drunk as sows," he said, coming aft and touching his hat as he spoke. "Quasho and the whole lot of them have turned in, and are snoring away like grampuses, except Sambo here at the helm, and he's pretty well 2 sheets in the wind." Higson had not observed this when he came on deck after supper, for Sambo, a big powerful negro, was keeping the vessel's head the right way, and steering a straight course. "Well, Sambo, how is it with you?" he asked, to ascertain the condition of the man. "Me sober as judge," answered the helmsman in a husky voice. "If de oder black fellows for'ard take too mush rum, no fault of mine. I mate a de snapper, and got character to lose." "Take care you don't lose it then, my friend," said Higson. "I see how it is. I shall have to put all hands on an allowance, and if you've got any rum stowed away, I must have it brought aft or hove overboard. You understand me?" "Yes, Massa Ossifer, berry right," answered the black, with a grin. "You can lie down, Needham, and be ready to keep watch with Mr Norris," said Higson. "If there isn't another nigger to relieve Sambo, you can take the helm, and as the weather promises to hold fine, we shall do very well." In less than a minute Dick was asleep, with a sail over his head, and Higson paced the deck till past midnight. He then roused up Needham, and sent him down to call Norris. Tom, also awaking, sprang on deck. As soon as Higson had turned in, Sambo declared that he could no longer stand at the helm, and Needham taking it, the black dived into the forepeak. A growling and chattering sound ascended, but no one appeared. It was evident that the negroes considered the buckra officers competent to manage the vessel, and had resolved to take their ease. At daylight the occupants of the cabin came on deck well baked. They talked of heaving to and bathing, but the fin of a shark appearing above the surface made them change their minds, and they refreshed themselves by heaving buckets of water over each other. The lazy crew had not yet appeared. "We'll soon make them show themselves," said Higson, and he, Timmins, and Norris, each taking a bucket full to the brim, hove the contents simultaneously down the forepeak. A chorus of shrieks and shouts instantly followed. "Oh, Key, what oh, lud, we all go to be drowned!" exclaimed the blacks, as springing from their berths they tried to make their way on deck. Quasho, with eyes only half open, bolted right against Higson, sending him sprawling on the deck. The next man capsized Timmins, and would have bolted overboard in his fright, had not Tom and Gerald caught him and hauled him back. The head of the big mate next appeared, when those below, catching him by the legs, pulled him down again, on which he began belabouring them with head and fists and heels, till one by one they made their escape, leaving him knocking his skull against the deck, under the belief that he had some of them still under him. "A pretty set of fellows you are!" exclaimed Higson, rising to his feet. "What would have become of us if we had been caught in a squall, and thrown on our beam ends? No more grog for any of you this cruise, you'll understand that." As soon as the big mate, now the most tipsy of the party, had been got on deck, Higson and Timmins went below, but not a bottle of rum could they find. There were a few cocoa nuts and gourds in the lockers, and other provisions, but that was all. As the place was horribly unsavoury, they were glad to get on deck again. "Buckra Ossifer, no find rum all gone," said Quasho, with a well feigned sigh. The other negroes grinned, and the big mate looked highly amused, but said nothing. The fire in the caboose having been lighted, the black skipper acting as cook, the midshipmen sat down to breakfast. Everything now went smoothly enough. Spider afforded a fund of amusement. As the wind was aft, it was too hot to do anything else than play with him. The black crew, with the exception of the man at the helm, lay down forward, and were soon fast asleep. When it was time to relieve him, Captain Quasho kicked up one of the sleepers and sent him aft, expediting his movements by a pretty sharp bang on the head with a frying pan, observing, "Me know how to keep discipline aboard de Snapper, I tink." Thus the day wore on, luncheon and dinner occupying a good deal of time, for, in spite of the heat, the midshipmen retained their appetites. The heat increased as the sun rose. If it was hot on deck, it was hotter still in the cabin, which the stifling air and the cockroaches rendered almost insupportable. Towards evening they came in sight of the curious island of Saba, having the appearance of a high, barren, conical shaped rock rising directly out of the ocean. As they got nearer, a few huts were seen at the base of the mountain, and in front a flight of steps hewn out of the solid rock, leading to the very summit. They ran in and anchored close to the shore in a little cove. As there was still an hour or more of daylight, they agreed to land at once and explore the place that evening, so that they might sail again next morning. Up the steps they climbed, for it was evident that they must lead somewhere. On reaching the top, what was their surprise to find themselves on the rim of a large circular basin, and looking down on a small town, standing in its midst surrounded by vegetable gardens and orchards. The inhabitants received them very cordially, not often being troubled by visitors, and offered them the best the island could supply, chiefly vegetables and fish, with the promise of a kid if they would stay till the next day. An unsophisticated race were these Saba Islanders, the world forgetting, by the world forgot. As there would be no little risk of breaking their necks should they attempt to descend the steps at night, the adventurers wished their hospitable entertainers good bye, and returned to the shore. It was hot on the top of the hill, it was hot everywhere, so they agreed that it would be as well to sail at once, so as to have a longer time to spend at St. Kitts and Nevis. On hailing the Snapper, Needham came on shore in the boat. He was in a state of great indignation. A fishing boat had come alongside, when Quasho, with his mate and crew, had gone away in her, carrying with them a number of cocoa nuts and gourds, which they said were to sell to the people on shore, and they had coolly left word that they should not be back till the next morning. "On this, sir," continued Dick, "I smelt a rat, and on hunting about in the forepeak I found a cocoa nut half full of rum. Thinks I to myself, that's just what they're going to fill the others with, and when they come back they'll be as drunk as they were last night, and we shall have to look after the craft instead of them." "The rascals!" exclaimed Higson. "We'll go and kick them up before they've had time to do that same. What do you say, boys?" All were ready to accompany him, but Higson insisted that Tom and Gerald and Archy should go on board and wait till he and the rest returned with the runaways. "You can loose the sails and get ready for weighing, as the wind is off shore. We shan't be long, depend on that," he said, as he and the rest turned to make their way towards one of the huts, where they hoped to learn what had become of Quasho and his crew. Needham and the three youngsters returned on board, and busied themselves as they had been directed. The heat was greater than they had yet experienced since they had been in the West Indies, and they were thankful to see the sun set, albeit in an unusually ruddy glow, hoping that it would be cooler at night. The wind had dropped completely. There was little prospect of putting to sea that night. "I don't half like the look of the weather, Mr Rogers," said Needham to Tom, who had remained with him on deck, while Gerald and Archy were making preparations for supper below. "I wish we were in a snugger berth where we could moor ship, that I do." "Why, the water is as calm as a mill pond. I don't see how we can come to any harm," answered Tom. The words were scarcely out of his mouth when, with the suddenness of a clap of thunder, a fearfully loud rushing sound was heard, as if the top of the mountain was hurtling down on their heads. The next instant they were lifted almost off their legs, and had they not clutched the shrouds they would have been carried overboard. The breath of the hurricane was upon them. The loosened canvas blew out and flapped wildly. The little vessel strained desperately at her anchor, while the water hissed and foamed round her bows. Gerald and Archy, wondering what had happened, came rushing up from below. "What's to be done?" they both asked. "The first thing is to get the mainsail and foresail stowed, and then to strike the topmast," answered Needham. With their united strength it was no easy matter to secure the mainsail. It was done, however, in a way when Needham, casting his eyes towards the shore, exclaimed, "The drogher is drifting. We must veer out more cable." There were not many fathoms to spare. The fury of the blast, however, had somewhat decreased, and the vessel appeared to be stationary. Needham hurried aloft, and while the midshipmen hauled on the heel rope of the topmast, the shrouds and stays being slacked, he tugged away at the fid. He had just got it out when a second blast, as furious as the first, burst on them. A loud report was heard. Ned slid down like lightning from aloft, and sprang aft to the helm. Tom, who had run forward, exclaimed, "The cable has parted." "I know it," answered Ned. "Hoist a foot of the foresail, Mr Rogers." The drogher spun round like a top, and off she flew before the hurricane. "Hadn't we better jump into the boat and let the vessel go?" asked Archy. "We could never pull to shore in the teeth of this wind, sir," answered Needham. "We can't get her on board, or tow her either. We must let her go." Meantime Tom and Gerald had been busy in stowing the foresail and securing the topmast shrouds and stays. As they looked aft for an instant, they could just distinguish some figures on the shore, but amid the wild tumult no voices could be heard, had they shouted ever so loudly. Needham now called Tom and Gerald to take the helm, while he tried to find a storm staysail, hoping with a couple of feet of it set to be able to scud before the hurricane. "It's our only chance," he said. "We've no hope of beating back till it's over, and the wider berth we give the island the better, for if the wind shifts we may be blown right on it, and lose the craft and our own lives too." The prospect was an appalling one, but the midshipmen did not lose heart. Away flew the drogher amid the roaring seas into the pitchy darkness, which now settled down over the ocean. Section 8 of the Three Lieutenants. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Three Lieutenants by William Henry Giles Kingston. Chapter 7. A ball at Antigua. Hurricane puts a stop to the dancing. A ride through the storm. Murray's ride with Stella, and a declaration. Colonel O'Regan and his daughter sail in the Sarah Jane. The inhabitants of Antigua are noted for their hospitality. The officers of the two ships received as many invitations as they could accept, with the loan of horses whenever they chose to ride. They lived on shore in airy barracks, far pleasanter quarters than the close cabins of the ships afforded. The colonel and his daughter were living at a cottage in the neighbourhood. Murray was Stella's constant attendant when she rode, and a frequent visitor at the cottage. If her father remarked the attention paid her by the young lieutenant, he did not consider it necessary to interfere. Perhaps he had ascertained that Murray was well off, and thought it best to let matters take their course. Or perhaps, absorbed in his own schemes, it did not occur to him that his daughter, who seemed so devoted to the cause he advocated, could do so weak a thing as fall in love. At all events, Alick lived in an Elysium partly created by his imagination, and did not allow the future to interfere with his present happiness. Jack and Adair still thought Stella very charming, but observing Alick's devotion to her, they would have considered it a gross breach of friendship to attempt cutting him out. She had other admirers, but she certainly gave them no encouragement. The midshipmen of the frigate thought their captain spoony, and the captain's clerk of the Tudor was guilty of a most reprehensible breach of confidence, if he spoke the truth, in whispering that he had one day discovered on the commander's desk a sonnet addressed to Stella's eyebrow. The fact, however, was doubted, as Captain Babbicome had never been suspected of possessing the slightest poetical talent, nor had a book of poetry ever been seen in his cabin. "Still," insisted the clerk, "love can work wonders. It must have been poetry, for the lines all began with capitals, and were written in the middle of the page." At length the ball took place. The Antiguan young ladies were full of life and spirit, and danced to perfection, never getting tired, so that the officers had no lack of partners, and voted it great fun. There were many very pretty girls among them, and several with much more of the rose on their cheeks than usually falls to the share of West Indian damsels. Some censorious critic even ventured to hint that it was added by the hand of art. That this was false was evident, for the weather was so hot that had rouge been used it would have inevitably been detected, but the island damsels trusted to their good figures and features, and their lively manners and conversation, rather than to any meretricious charms, to win admiration. Stella was generally considered the most charming of the maidens present, as undoubtedly she was the most blooming, and she seemed to enjoy the ball as much as any one. She danced with Captain Hemming, and went through a quadrille with Commander Babbicome. He then entreated her to perform a valse with him. Laughing heartily, she advised him not to make the attempt. Even the quiet dance had reduced him to a melting mood. "Why, you have valsed twice with my second lieutenant," he remarked, his choler rising. Stella gave him a look which might have shown him that he had better have held his tongue. The ball, which began at a primitively early hour, had been going on for some time, when a fierce blast, which shook the building to its very foundations, swept over it. "A hurricane has burst on the island," was the general exclamation. "Will it be a heavy one?" The increasing tempest gave the response. The naval captains thought of their ships, the residents of their plantations. Not that there was much risk for the former, as they were snugly moored, but still it was impossible to say what might happen. Preparations were made by all the officers and several of the gentlemen for instant departure, but of course the ladies could not face the tempest. Most of them, however, had not much heart for dancing, when possibly before morning their houses would be roofless and their fathers' plantations laid low. A few persevered in spite of the whirlwind raging over their heads, but even they had at length to give up. Their host insisted on all his female guests remaining. Cloaks and shawls were collected, and sofas and chairs brought into the ballroom, which was turned into a dormitory for those who could not be accommodated in the other rooms. Stella wanted to accompany her father, and was with difficulty persuaded to remain. Murray offered to ride back as soon as the gale was over, to escort her, and she smiled her consent. The colonel declared that he must go to look after his friends and their cottage, for he had no other excuse to offer. The officers started on horseback, but they could with difficulty sit their steeds, or keep their naval cloaks around them, as they faced the hurricane. Poor Commander Babbicome had a hard task to perform, as his struggling steed plunged forward in the darkness, and Jack and Adair, who in compassion rode up to his assistance, found him clutching tightly by the animal's mane, as he shouted out, "Steady now, steady, you brute! What is the wind about, that it cannot let a man sit his horse in quiet?" It was no easy matter, however, for the best of horsemen to keep their seats, and in the more exposed situations it seemed as if rider and steed would be blown over together. Leaves, dust, stones, branches of trees, and even heavier objects came rushing through the air in dense clouds, striking the travellers and obscuring their sight so that it was often impossible to see where they were going. The colonel seemed to revel in the wild uproar of the elements, and led the way through the darkness, shouting to his companions to follow. They were passing along a part of the road with tall trees on either side. The dark branches above their heads could be seen waving wildly to and fro, the tops bending before the blast. Ever and anon huge boughs were torn off, and several fell, sometimes in front, sometimes directly behind them, but no one had been struck. Then there came a fearful crash. A large tree had fallen directly in front of them. Jack thought that the colonel had been crushed, but no, there he was, sitting his horse as upright as ever. He had had a narrow escape, though. "On, friends, on!" he shouted. "It is more hazardous to stop than to push forward," and he leaped his steed over the trunk. Captain Hemming and Murray followed, their horses scrambling rather than leaping over the impediment. Jack and Adair might have done the same, but they would not desert the commander of the Tudor, by this time well nigh frightened out of his wits. Several of the rest who made the attempt toppled over with their beasts on their heads. "Leap, my good fellows, I could no more do it than fly," exclaimed Commander Babbicome, when he came to the tree. "You had better climb over, and I'll bring your horse after you," said Jack. "If I get off, I shall never get on again," cried the commander. "Bless my heart, what shall I do?" "Better try than run the chance of being crushed here," said Jack. At that moment another of the waving trees came crashing down close behind them, cutting off all retreat had it been contemplated. At the sound off tumbled Commander Babbicome, and in another instant, with more agility than he generally displayed, he had scrambled over the trunk and pitched right in among the men and horses struggling to get on their legs on the other side. Happily no one was much hurt, and some of his officers having assisted to place him on his feet, he set off running as fast as his legs could carry him. His steed, relieved of its burden, urged by Jack and Terence, got over better than the rest, and when they at length overtook him, they managed to hoist him again into his saddle. Though he cut a somewhat undignified figure on this occasion, they had no inclination to laugh at him, for they believed him to be as brave as most men, under ordinary circumstances, on the deck of his ship. They were both too very anxious about Tom and Gerald, and they could only hope that if the drogher had not returned, she was safe in some other port. Battered and bruised, though they had escaped any serious accident, the party at length reached the harbour. The officers who had remained behind, and all the men to be found, had hurried on board the ships directly the hurricane burst. Additional hawsers had been got out, the topmast had been struck, and everything necessary had been done. It was rather provoking to find that they might have remained on at the ball, but satisfactory to feel that all was right, and that they had done their duty. In almost any other harbour in the West Indies the case might have been very different. They of course spent the rest of the night on board. Nothing had been seen of the drogher, and Jack and Adair agreed that should she not appear in 2 or 3 days, they would get leave to go in search of her. She might have been wrecked on one of the neighbouring islands, and the party on board be unable to obtain the means of returning. By noon the next day the hurricane had ceased, and Murray accompanied Colonel O'Regan to St. John's, followed by a servant leading Stella's horse and carrying her riding habit. In every direction the havoc caused by the storm was visible, cottages blown down or unroofed, sugar canes laid low, fruit trees upturned or stripped of their fruit. In many places the road was almost impassable, but labourers were at work with saws and axes clearing away the trunks which lay across it. In the evening, when the air was comparatively cool and refreshing, Murray rode back with Stella. The colonel was detained by a person on business just as they were setting off, and begged that they would ride on, saying that he would overtake them. Alick said more than he had ever before ventured to do. Stella turned away her head while he was speaking, then, lifting her eyes to his face with an expression in hers certainly not of annoyance or anger, she answered: "You have your profession, Mr Murray. You assuredly do not contemplate quitting that, and I am the daughter of one the world calls an adventurer. I cannot desert him while he allows me to bear him company, and I know not in what direction his fate may lead him. Perchance your regard for me may prove but a passing fancy, and you would regret having bound yourself to one whom, after we part on this occasion, you may not meet again for years, when she may be so changed, as everything we see around us changes, that you would not recognise her. I know too well that this has been the case with others. Why not with us?" Her voice trembled as she uttered the last sentences. Murray urged every plea which his honest affection prompted. He had no fears of what she dreaded. He trusted that before long he should obtain his promotion, and then, in these piping times of peace, he might expect to remain for some time on shore, and be able to occupy his Highland home. "I dare not pledge my troth, but there is no one for whose happiness I can more earnestly pray," said Stella, looking at him with her bright eyes beaming, as the most ardent lover could desire. "Will that satisfy you?" "Yes, dearest Stella, because I know that you would not trifle with one who has given you a true and faithful heart," answered Alick. He had never before uttered such words, and the tone of his voice showed the deep feeling which prompted them. "I believe you," she said simply. Alick would rather have had a more demonstrative reply. A rough road strewn with branches and other impediments to their progress was not favourable for such a conversation. Still, as Stella had not objected to the terms he had applied to her, he had no reason to complain. They rode on for some time in silence. Stella was the first to break it. "Mr Murray, you need not feel yourself bound to speak to my father on the subject. Indeed, I would rather that you should not," she said. "He pays me the compliment of putting full confidence in my discretion, and leaves me to act as I consider right. I suspect that his affection prevents him from believing me otherwise than perfect, and he thinks consequently that I am incapable of doing anything of which he would not approve." "In my eyes, too, you are perfect, Stella," said Alick. "That, by your own reasoning, is the best proof of affection." "I do not doubt yours, Mr Murray. I am sure of it, and I am more than grateful," answered Stella, looking up at him. "Still, affection should not blind us to the faults of those we love, as in time the tinsel must wear off our idols, and disappointment, if not a painful reaction, will be the result." "But all idols are not tinselled," said Alick. "The spotless Parian marble " "I object altogether to idol worship," interrupted Stella. "I desire to be loved for myself, I own, but I would be so with all my faults and failings known. Could I be sure of them, I would tell them to you, but I cannot boast of having attained to the height of wisdom and learnt to know myself. I must leave to you the task of discovering them, and the means for their correction. Only let me entreat you to believe that they exist, and perhaps are more numerous than you will think possible." Of course Alick very sincerely protested that Stella and imperfection could not be named together, except as contrasts, for he truly thought so. She sighed, and then smiled, and the colonel, cantering up, cut short the interesting conversation, interesting to the two persons concerned at all events. "Stella, I find that we must start for Jamaica immediately," he said. "If Captain Hemming cannot proceed there, we shall be compelled to go by another vessel. A brig now in the harbour, I understand, sails for Port Royal to morrow, and though I would defer our departure for 3 days longer, unless either of the men of war is to sail by the end of that time, we must not lose the present opportunity." "So soon?" ejaculated Stella. She said no more, for she no more thought of inquiring the motive of her father's actions than of opposing his wishes. Alick watched her countenance. It was graver and more sad than he had ever seen it. Her lip quivered, but with a strong effort she recovered herself, though she did not venture to trust her voice. Alick knew that Captain Hemming would not sail before the return of the drogher with his midshipmen, or should she not appear until he had endeavoured to ascertain their fate. The colonel asked Murray's opinion. Alick gave it, but advised him to apply to Captain Hemming on the possibility of his sending the Tudor on to Jamaica before the frigate. His heart beat with hope that this might be done, and Stella's countenance brightened when he spoke of it. Their friends, the Houghtons, with whom Stella and her father were staying, were much concerned when they heard of his determination. "But must your daughter accompany you, colonel?" asked Mrs Houghton, a good-natured, motherly dame whose daughters were all married. "We shall be delighted if Stella will remain with us, and we will find her an escort when the frigate sails; though for my part I would not hesitate to send a daughter of mine and a female attendant without one." Stella did not express her thanks for this proposal with the warmth which might have been expected. The colonel accompanied Murray to the barracks, where they found the two captains. The colonel stated his wishes. Captain Hemming regretted that he could not sail in time to suit his convenience, but if Miss O'Regan would remain with the Houghtons he should be delighted to give her and her attendant a passage, and any lady who might be able to accompany her. He would, however, consult Commander Babbicome, and ascertain whether the Tudor could be got ready for sea in time. Commander Babbicome was mute. When the colonel had gone, he expressed himself somewhat strongly to his superior. He had heard reports concerning Colonel O'Regan's schemes, and he had no wish to commit himself by carrying such a person on board his ship. Charming as Miss O'Regan might be considered by some, he did not always go with the herd. The captain of the frigate could send the Tudor to sea, but he could not compel her commander to give up his cabin to passengers, so he did not press the point. It would have been better for Commander Babbicome had he been more courteous, but no more than other mortals could he foresee what the future was to bring forth. Colonel O'Regan went on board the brig Sarah Jane. Though of so unwarlike a name, she was a large rakish craft, evidently very fast, with square yards and taunt masts, well fitted for a blockade runner, or any work of that description, and her skipper, a dark, big-whiskered fellow, looked the man fit to command her. He and the colonel shook hands, as if they had before been acquainted, and had a long conversation. "Under the circumstances, colonel, we'll clear out for Porto Bello instead of Port Royal," he said, laughing, "for, as you know, we have a roving commission, and we may find a better market for our goods on the Spanish Main than at a British port. I expect to fall in with the sloop to the westward of St. Kitt's, when we may get some stores from her, and proceed in company." The colonel, having concluded his arrangements, returned to the cottage. Stella evinced no surprise when he communicated his change of plan. "Am I to accompany you?" she asked in a faltering voice, while her cheek became paler than usual. At one time she would have entreated to be allowed to go without asking whither. "As the cabins of the brig are commodious, and the frigate is not likely to sail for some time, I shall be glad of your society," answered the colonel, not remarking her increasing agitation. "Should the state of affairs not be more propitious than of late, I intend returning forthwith to Jamaica, where I will leave you with your relatives, the Bradshaws, while I go back once more to await the course of events. You will thus probably reach Jamaica sooner than you would have done had you waited for these laggard men of war." Stella had become calm again while her father uttered the last sentences. She expressed her readiness to do as he wished, and said truly that she wished ever to be with him. though she might have added that she pined for the time when he would be content to abandon his schemes and settle in some quiet home, either in Britain or one of her colonies, as he had at times talked of doing when his restless spirit was for a time quelled by weariness or disappointment. Kind Mr and Mrs Houghton pressed her to remain with them and to go on to Jamaica in the frigate. They feared, with good reason, that Stella would be exposed to all sorts of dangers if she accompanied the colonel. They had no confidence in his schemes, and they thought him very wrong in wishing to take her with him, though they did not tell her so. "I will assist you, my dear, to get over one of your difficulties, for I dare say you do not think it quite the thing to be alone on board the frigate without a chaperon," exclaimed Mrs Houghton, coming into Stella's room. "I have long promised to pay a visit to my daughter Julia and her husband, whose estate is next to the Bradshaws, and I intend to ask Captain Hemming to give me a passage. What do you say, Stella? Your father cannot object to my plan. It is so evidently the right one. Shall I tell him that you agree to it?" It was a severe trial for Stella, but she was resolute in doing what she believed to be her duty. She thanked Mrs Houghton warmly for her kindness. She was, however, under orders. As a soldier's daughter she had learnt obedience. Unless her father commanded her to remain at Antigua, she must embark in the brig. What effect the arguments of Alick Murray might have produced it is impossible to say. He, unfortunately, was detained by duty on board the corvette, and did not reach the cottage till late in the evening, not aware of Colonel O'Regan's altered plans. He was thunderstruck when he heard of them, and very much inclined to quarrel with the colonel, who did not seem to be aware that he was inducing his daughter to make any unusual sacrifice. Thanks to Mrs Houghton's management, Alick and Stella were alone for a short time. She did not disguise from him how much the parting cost her, but entreated him to keep up his spirits in the hope that they might soon again meet in Jamaica. Alick, with Rogers and Adair, accompanied Stella and the colonel on board the brig the next morning. The two latter knew that they were not intruding on their friend. They warmly entered into his feelings, though they might have doubted that Stella's affection for him was as deep as he supposed, especially when they observed her tearless eye and calm manner when she parted from him. Their boat remained alongside till the brig was well out of the harbour. As long as any one could be discerned on board, a figure was seen standing at the stern watching them as they pulled back. Alick did not speak. All seemed a dream to him. But yesterday he thought himself the happiest of mortals. Now Stella was gone, and to what fearful dangers might she not be exposed? Rogers and Adair wished to divert his thoughts, and began to talk of the missing midshipmen. The captain gives them 3 days more, and if the drogher does not appear at the end of that time, he intends to send the Tudor to look for them, said Jack. I regret allowing Tom to go, for when a number of youngsters are together they are sure to get into mischief. "We found it so occasionally in our younger days, to be sure," observed Adair. "I, too, am sorry I let Gerald go. However, Higson is a steady fellow, and I hope has taken good care of them." When Houghton heard that we were becoming anxious about the youngsters, he offered to send his schooner, the Swordfish, to look for them. Observed Murray, rousing himself up, "If I can get leave from Babbicome, and I am sure he will give it to escape having to take the Tudor to sea, I will go in the schooner. She is far better fitted for cruising among the islands than the corvette, and will be more likely to find the drogher." "A good idea of yours, Alick, and I will go with you, as I am sure to get leave," said Jack. Adair wished that he could go also, but he and Rogers could not be away from the ship together for any length of time. Jack and Terence, like true friends, stuck close to Alick for the remainder of the day, doing their utmost to keep him from brooding over his unhappiness. His feelings, they knew, were too deep to allow them to banter him, as they would probably have done under ordinary circumstances. CHAPTER VIII.